Hello, everyone. Welcome to Culture 2.0. My name is Vivek here. I'm one of the founders here at QuestionPro, and we're so glad to have all of you here. This is the third webinar in our three-part series around culture. We've talked about mapping, we've talked about measurement and management, and now today we'll talk about benchmarking. So I'm joined by my good friend Jamie, who's Jamie Notter, who's a partner at WorkXO Solutions. It's a culture management firm that uses culture, analytics, and innovative consulting to drive company growth. Well, that's a mouthful, but he's a good friend, more importantly. And he's been in the business for over 25 years. He's done all kinds of different things. One of the interesting things that I like to point out about Jamie is he's done conflict resolution in the past, so which is very, very interesting, at least to me. And he's written 2 books. All great people at some point write some books. So the 2 books that he wrote along with his partner Maddie is When Millennials Take Over, very provocatively titled, and a book called Humanize. So welcome, Jamie. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. So a little bit about myself and QuestionPro. My name is Vivek, like I said, and I started QuestionPro about 10 years ago. So we are a SaaS platform that helps companies collect insights through the notion of surveys. And we have 3 different pieces of our business. We could say 3 different product lines. One is for consumer insights and market research, where people are trying to figure out what to do in the future. Then the other one is around customer experience, where people are trying to figure out how their existing customers are feeling towards them. And the third piece of our business is what we call Workforce, which is our HR and employee engagement platform, where it allows our companies, our folks rather, within to understand how their employees are feeling. So that's enough about us. Let's jump right into it. I like to kind of start off with a simple conversation around, hey, what is culture, Jamie? Can you explain to us what culture really is and how you define it?
Yeah. So, and it's also, I think, part of the recap here. We talked about in the first episode of this series about the importance of mapping your culture. Culture is basically what's valued inside your organization, right? It's the words you use, it's the actions that people take, it's tangible things like dress code and office location and office layout. All of those things put together make it clear internally in your organization what's really valued. And then what's really valued is what drives the behavior inside your organization. And so that's one of the reasons why we talked about in the first one, why it's so important to map your culture in a way that people get, that they look at it and say, yeah, that is what our culture is. So we shared a little bit about the model we developed, the Workplace Genome, and the 8 culture markers around that. In the second part of the series, if you missed that, we talked about the importance of culture management, and really got a little more detailed about what you need to do in terms of culture metrics to make sure you understand not only what your culture is, but what it should be. Right, like it's not just good enough to say we have a culture. You have to be able to say we have a very specific culture that is designed intentionally to drive the success of the organization. We talked about this before, if you're a nuclear power plant, maybe you don't need to emphasize innovation as much as the business press says you need to. Maybe you need to do things exactly like you did yesterday, and maybe have someone check on you. But if you are a software company, you might have to actually make sure that you have put in place not just the concepts behind innovation, but the real behaviors behind it, and that you've really tweaked your culture to make sure that's lined up. So we talked about the importance of that and the importance of getting very specific and detailed. And so today we're going to talk about benchmarking, because it's never sort of a one-shot deal with metrics. You never just want to sort of take a snapshot and then you're done with it. There's always a comparative part of it. But I find that leads to, in the culture conversation, that leads to this discussion of, well, what's the ideal culture? And tell me how I compare to perfect cultures or to others in my industry and that kind of thing. So the benchmarking topic comes up, and we're going to sort of go right into maybe being provocative. This is kind of our style, I think, Vivek. We like to push the
Absolutely.
envelope. But one of the key lessons is going to be about benchmarking against yourself. And in order to get to that point, we wanted to make it clear, at least I do, you tell me if you disagree on this, but I think we're on the same page. Industry benchmarks are maybe I won't say completely useless. Maybe I should. Maybe I should say they're completely useless. I think it's a waste of time. So tell me what you think about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I think both you and I have a culture of being provocative. So let's start there, right? So so we've done two of these webinars. Yeah, at least we've been consistent. We've done two of these webinars, at least in the part 1 and 2, and I've looked at it. I mean, I can speak to myself. I mean, about our own company. We're a mid-sized SaaS tech platform, and I mean, a lot of people talk to me, and I talk to my buddies, and we're running companies, and I really kind of sometimes I compare myself, and most of the times, like, it's really, do I want to get compared against Microsoft or Slack or no? I mean, I could care less, honestly. Yeah, what drives success to Microsoft and Slack and Google? Yes, Google offers free lunches, or catered lunches, or and does that matter? And from my perspective, I could care less, seriously. I mean, and that's why I kind of on this point I definitely agree with you in terms of, like, the industry benchmarks are cute, but generally non-actionable. And, like, just if I am worse than all the other tech companies on a particular area, is that the reason for me to create action? Or I don't think so. I don't believe that.
No, we get asked all the time, particularly because we have a culture assessment, and we've now gathered data from a fair number of organizations. They're like, everybody wants to know. They want to know, like, whenever I show them their scores, they're like, yeah, but how do we compare? What's the overall average? And I remember actually for a conference I did for a bunch of nonprofits I was speaking at, and I pulled together some of the data. There's only about 20 organizations that made it into this particular data set, so it's not like I was drawing any huge conclusions. But they were asking, so I'm like, all right, I'll show you what we got in terms of the culture. And I was speaking to nonprofits, which is the gray line on this chart, and I was all excited to show it to them because I knew they'd be depressed that their scores were, quote, low. Which, as we've talked about already, that's not the issue. It's not about whether you're high or low, and that's just where you need to be. But if I show this to organizations and say, hey, look at the software industry, they're scoring more futurist. That's the blue line. So congratulations, Vivek. You can just put yourself the blue line up there. It's more futurist than associations and nonprofits. And of course, the lowest scoring one there is manufacturing, which I guess is not a huge surprise. But I show this to any audience, and it absolutely does not even begin to touch an answer to the question of so what. Who cares? I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe I'll get in there in the nonprofit's face a little and say, really, you're less agile than manufacturing, but maybe that's exactly where they need to be. And I find that if you want to compare yourself even to the people who put up a standard and say, well, I've studied the high performing organizations and their culture looks like this, I still don't think that is enough information to answer the who cares question or the so what question. Like, so what? How can you show me that that's going to drive your success if you copy a high performing organization? Because it may not. And so I find the whole thing distracting, and I think we should actually shift and be much more focused on comparing against ourselves.
And I would second that, in the sense that on a very practical level, yes, it may. I think a lot of these comparing against industry benchmark is useful, maybe to put it up on a slide at best.
That's right. It's useful to me, the speaker. So I got no problem with it, but it's not going to help you.
As a guy who runs the company, I'm like, all right, so what do I do next? And there's, so what? The so what question is so obvious that at some point you're just doing it. Maybe I do it for a board presentation, and that's about it. But I know that there's no relevance to kind of my financial outcome, as with most probably board presentations. But separate issue. Separate issue.
We'll do a different webinar on that later.
That's right. So tell us. Let's just kind of shift the focus and saying, like, okay, so what do we really? How do we kind of benchmark? How do we, if we can't benchmark against the industry, then what is the definition of benchmarking, and how can we think about benchmarking?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell a quick story about an organization that did this, and they were a company, fairly small company, but they had just acquired um, another company that was in a different location, and for them that was a big deal. They're about 300 people, but this was their first time where they weren't bringing everyone back to headquarters. Like, they're going to maintain an office in a new city now, and that was new for them, right? And so shortly after that acquisition, they did a mapping of their culture, which was helpful. And I mentioned in the last series that you always want to look at subgroups, and you talked about location as a great example. And when they looked at their data, they actually scored fairly futurist, and I think in ways that was pretty predictable for them. They weren't particularly surprised by their data. Because they came in with a pretty strong culture. Actually, they already knew what they valued, and they already had it connected to what drives success. But what they found was that the new organization in Houston basically was experiencing the culture in some pretty different ways, and particularly around growth and solutions and transparency. But the transparency piece was the biggest issue for them, because in their particular organization, they already knew. This goes to sort of, I think in their case, already having a pretty solid culture management like infrastructure in place. They already knew that transparency was really critical to their success. Okay, it was a real hallmark for their culture. And again, for them, they scored above a 7 on that overall as an organization, which is relatively high compared to some of the organizations we're studying. It's because they knew that was important. The gap between the newly acquired company and sort of the headquarters was problematic for them, because if it's that important to what drives their success, then they need to make sure that people are experiencing the same way. The short version for them is, like, they knew how to do transparency, they just didn't know how to do it long distance. Right? They didn't know how to do it with a group that wasn't there. And so once they saw this data, they actually had a team. We helped them put a team together that came up with an action plan to move the needle. And they did some cool stuff. I mean, they spent more money on plane tickets to get people to go back and forth. Like, they did some logical things to try and address this issue. And a year later, they measured again, and they had closed the gap. And again, for them, what I'm waiting to see for these guys is longer term data on, did that actually move some performance metrics. This only recently happened, so I don't have that information, but I think that's the next step on the metrics. But for this particular organization, the core map of looking at these 8 markers, they knew they had to sort of shrink that gap, and they basically took action and measured it. So this has nothing to do with how they compare to the software industry or any other industry, and it doesn't even have anything to do with whether the cool companies do something. They knew they needed to do it, and they used the metrics to show that it worked.
And also, I mean, I think jumping in over here, also, like, they've probably already defined that transparency drives success.
Yeah.
That's a definition that they've already kind of like made that assumption and or proven that, and they wanted, effectively, their Houston, the new business unit, to be in line effectively, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the benchmarking that they've done, is kind of the internal benchmarking around not only how did we do from compared to last year, but how within different segments are doing. And that is the level of benchmarking that allows companies to look at different pockets within the organization and see, like, we know this drives success, how do we get these people here, and here's the gap between where this segment is and where the overall company is.
Yes, I actually think that's something that I try and hold companies to a higher standard on, because I think I don't know, we sort of give lip service to what drives our success. Like, oh yeah, transparency, that's good. Collaboration, that's another one I hear all the time. Oh yeah, we need collaboration. I was so excited once I found a senior management team that finally got honest about collaboration. One of the senior managers was like, hey, you want to know how I define collaboration here? It's interference. If I have to collaborate with you, it means I need to stop the work I'm doing, the work that drives 80% of our revenue, and I got to go help you with your thing. That's a problem. I'm like, and I was like, thank goodness someone is speaking the truth here, right? Like, if that's true, then maybe I need people to be off in their corners
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's like, and I don't have a judgment about which way you should go. You should be really clear. Hey, in this culture, what's going to drive our success? In some cultures, you have to be collaborative. And actually, to tell the truth, in that particular culture, they had a problem because they weren't collaborating enough, and they did shift it. But you got to make that call, and I feel like that call often gets missed. We sort of choose a vague ideal that we like transparency as opposed to a no, we really need it.
And kind of, I want to probe you a little bit more. Like, and I'm just curious over here. Like, do you guys have, what model do you guys use to say like, okay, these are the 8 kind of the vectors that we have, and which one of these is driving revenue success? Which one of these is driving success more than the others? Not because you can't tell me all these things are equally important, because then none of them become important. I think, in my opinion, at least, right? So.
Yeah, no. That one varies a lot by organization. I mean, this is again sort of reinforcing what we've been saying in this part of the series, which is it's not about benchmarking. It's about understanding yourself and your own environment. This is where I actually have to get like the management team together and hold their feet to the fire around getting away from the platitudes about what drives success and actually saying, you know what, this is what makes our product better. This is what makes our customers a little bit happier than and that little bit is what makes the difference in our revenue. So we're going to start valuing these things. And then you got to take a stand, like you say, then we value these things. And so we're going to actually start firing people who don't value them.
Right. So you're taking that risk, right? At the end of the day, like you have to say, I'm kind of curious as to, do you say that, have you gone into management teams and said, hey, you only get to pick 3 out of these 8 that you want to be good at, just to force that kind of, force that thinking down people's throats, to say that you can't be good at
Well,
everything?
yeah, I mean, usually it just emerges. Like most people will get pretty honest about it. And actually, when we do the mapping exercise, it's really interesting because they'll see in the data immediately, wow, in this particular marker, there's just nothing interesting. Like none of this, like it's all what I thought it would be, but I don't think it makes a difference. They see very quickly when there's some really huge contradiction or some interesting pattern, like I mentioned in the last one around innovation, where the ideas were in one level and the concepts were, and the actions were at another level. They see it right away. Most leaders, they do understand what drives their success. They're just not good at articulating it. And when they see the sort of picture that's painted by the data, they tend to go, it's that. That's the piece that's been missing. And it usually is no more than about 3 of the areas that either need to either move up or move down. I mean, I've had folks that are like, score really well on innovation, like really futurist on innovation, so very high numbers. And it's like, yeah, that's great. You're innovating, like you're innovating the trains every day, but the trains don't run on time. Like it's a new train every day, but it still doesn't get there on time. I'm like, folks, you got to dial that back. Like that's actually getting in the way. You need to work on some implementation stuff.
Got it. Right. So great. That makes sense.
So related to that, I want to sort of have one more story of how an organization actually benchmarks against themselves. And the point I want to make is you got to move the right needles. I think I've said this a few times. A lot of organizations, once they get their metrics, all they do is focus on making the numbers go up. Like it doesn't even matter what number it is. It's like, oh, we got to make our numbers go up. We scored a 7.9, got to be an 8.3, and it drives me crazy. And so I actually worked with an organization. I mentioned this group actually in the last one that had some issues around transparency, right? And they realized it's not that they weren't sharing enough information; it's that they had too many people, sort of too many cooks in the kitchen, right? They had too many people deciding, and so they become very slow, right? So that's the success driver, is that their speed was reduced and their customers were feeling it. So they knew they had to move faster. So when we worked with them, we helped them develop a set of basically like 3 to 4 cultural priorities. What are your priorities for your culture right now? And one of them, these are their words, they said, in this culture, everyone has a voice, because they were really about inclusion. That's why they ended up with so many people in the decision-making process. So they love inclusion. So yes, everyone has a voice, but not everyone decides. Like for them, and maybe you take that for granted, like of course, for them that was a big deal. They didn't have that. They had a culture where everyone was involved.
It's consensus-based culture. So okay,
right.
Okay,
so
got it.
They are shifting. Our priority right now for our culture is, hey, you still have a voice, but not everyone decides. And so once they got clear that that was the priority, like at this point, they didn't need to move the needle on transparency, for instance. Like that wasn't it, or even agility or any of the other 8 markers. They needed to move the needle on this. How do I know that I'm shifting my culture where we don't involve everyone in decisions? Now, they got to come up with their own metrics on that. Maybe I'm doing a pulse survey and saying, hey, in the last week, did you attend more than one meeting that you shouldn't have been at? You know, like whatever, like you can come up with whatever kind of metric you have, but you're moving the needle on this because you've already done the math about how that connects to what drives success. And so they don't need to obsess over the 8 markers all the time. Sometimes they need to create their own unique measures and then sort of go in that direction.
Right. So that creates your own kind of like, you're kind of like subsecting the genome and then kind of creating your own markers effectively, because you've identified that by this point, you've identified that these markers, these kind of segments within the markers are what you want to get to, and then you can create a set of metrics, or at least set of questions that map to those map to your custom markers, if you will.
Yeah, because this is, again, back to the whole point of culture to begin with. This is what drives behavior, right? So if you really get clear that in this culture not everyone decides, like I want some metrics about how many meetings people are going to. And if I got a senior manager that's still showing up at all the meetings that she shouldn't be at because it's not her area, then that's a performance issue. Then I'm having those conversations. I mean, I make the point all the time, like if you're doing culture well, if you're doing culture management right, and you're not firing people, then you're doing it wrong. You know, like when you're really clear on culture, either you fire people or people quit because they realize I don't want to behave the way you're telling me that our culture needs right now. And if that's true, then great, let's help you find a new job, right? Because this is not for you.
Yeah, and you've talked about this, Jamie, and I want to kind of reemphasize this, like, you know, and we've talked about it quite a bit, where you part ways with employees because there's a misalignment in terms of what the employees are expecting versus what you can provide, and that not necessarily is a bad thing, in the sense that work from home is a great example, or kind of, there are some people who absolutely, a company may decide like, no, this is not good for our culture, and there's some people who just who want that flexibility, or who kind of value that flexibility at an astronomically high, at a different way. That doesn't mean it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just like you're not aligned effectively. The employee is not aligned with kind of his kind of viewpoint of what is needed, and that each employee is obviously, as as we all know, each employee is completely different, and that the alignment is what we all should kind of look for and strive for.
Yeah. No, and real clarity on that. I know one software company that does paired programming, so no one works from home because you got to be sharing a computer with somebody. And I know another one where everyone has their own office and doesn't work together ever. And they're both successful. So as long as you figure out what drives your success, you align culture with that, and you align people with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so again, thank you, Jamie. I can't stress enough how much you've been enlightening us. We will make culture management a thing.
Yes.
I will do my level best in kind of promoting it. I'm sold on it. Quick housekeeping items. You see the hashtag in front of you, culture WTF. If you guys have questions, comments, thoughts, opposing ideas, please use the hashtag on Twitter to chime in. Two kind of shameless housekeeping items. One is we want to give everybody who's in this webinar, who've been listening to us, rant about culture and talk about culture and poke everybody, a free QuestionPro license, so that you can actually do something and start mapping and measuring against your culture, and also a free copy of Jamie's book around culture that works, so that you can read more about his thoughts, read more about how he came up with the genome, and so on and so forth. So Jamie, thank you again. Absolutely love these podcasts slash webinars. I think these things are a lot of fun. I think they are definitely very provocative, and I think at least I'll speak for myself. I've learned a couple of new things as we go along in this journey. So thank you for educating us, Jamie.
No, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks for really being committed to the culture topic. I know obviously it's connected to the work you guys do, but I'm glad that you're sort of putting your money where your mouth is and getting serious about it. So I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Till next time. Bye-bye.